welcome to Pulse by AlphaWire, the podcast where science and education meet cutting-edge technology and artificial intelligence. My name is Aldo and each week I sit down with innovators, thinkers and doers who are working to change our world for the better. Together we explore their journeys, uncover the lessons they've learned, and take the entrepreneurial pulse that drives them on their path to success. This week, we are looking at the rapidly evolving technology landscape from an investment angle. I speak to Thomas Rush, partner at ConsenSys Mesh, an investment vehicle founded by ConsenSys, the biggest blockchain company in the world. ConsenSys Mesh has invested in over 150 blockchain companies to date, including my very own company, Genomes.io. Thomas and I speak about growing companies with complex missions, how to balance crypto with utility, and the importance of integrity in investing. Hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Thomas Rush. Yes, and we are live with another episode here of The Gene. Today I have with me Thomas Rush, partner at ConsenSys Mesh. And ConsenSys Mesh is this great incubator, accelerator, kind of investment vehicle for very early on Web3 founders who have great ideas. And full disclosure, Genomes.io, the company that I am the current CEO of, was also incubated by ConsenSys Mesh at the time known as Tachyon back in 2019. Thomas, a very warm welcome to you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So happy you could make it. Obviously, so we're now starting a new academic year. How has the summer been for you?
Summer's been wonderful. I have two young kids, so we're doing all sorts of summer things, lots of sprinklers and swimming, and then gearing up, like you said, for the new academic year.
And where are you based?
Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn, okay, nice. Yeah. So has it been an excruciatingly hot summer in Brooklyn, or how has it been?
So we had a heat wave hit the week or two when we actually moved. So we moved into a new home and didn't have proper air conditioning during a heat wave. But outside of those 2 weeks, which were fairly contentious, just given all the boxes and logistics, everything else has been beautiful. It's nice and cool today. I'm actually wearing pants in August, which is a surprise.
Nice. Wearing pants in August, that's a luxury. I'm here based in Aberdeen in Scotland. And today it's like 20 degrees, which is like high summer, 20 degrees Celsius. I think that's early 70s or something. Like it's not particularly hot by any means, but I'm in the far northeast of Scotland, so of the UK, sorry, and in the northeast of Scotland as well. So we're right across from Norway. So we never get very hot summers. So I'm not too envious about people who have hot summers, but I wear this like I'm wearing a thick shirt, so to say, all summer long. So that's a little bit more about our summer. But we're not here to talk about the weather. Thomas, we never crossed paths at ConsenSys. When did you start with ConsenSys?
Early on. So I joined formally in June of 2017 and was even contributing earlier than that, just not as a full-time employee.
Okay, so now I'm embarrassed. So we did cross paths then in 2019.
Technically speaking, I wasn't super involved with Tachyon during the cohort you were in. So that would explain why we probably didn't meet in person at that time.
Okay. So take me back to 2017 when you started, because ConsenSys is such a fascinating company, I think. So, and I can imagine it has evolved. But what was it like when you began there?
Yeah, so I was one of the first employees that was non-technical. I mean, there were certainly a few before me, but it was a much smaller company then, somewhere around 100 employees. Again, mostly engineers. And so there was a very, very, in the best way possible, experimental stage of ConsenSys. Joe Lubin, the founder of ConsenSys, established an environment where everyone was very comfortable to effectively build whatever they were interested in and what they thought that the ecosystem needed. So you can imagine a world where, Ethereum had just been launched 2 years prior, and you have developers who see the potential for various decentralized technologies, but they need all sorts of things to get there, right? They need certain sets of infrastructure, certain middleware, certain tooling, wallets, etc. And that's exactly where you have some of ConsenSys' most successful products come from, which was, MetaMask, Infura. Now, of course, they've launched Linea, etc. later on. But a lot of the early tooling and infrastructure came from actually the needs of the developers who were there trying to build on, certain blockchain technologies, and them realizing what was needed in order to do so more efficiently.
So in 2017, I mean, blockchain must have been such an abstract concept. I mean, it must have been. We always say like we're now part of a DeSci narrative, but in 2019 when we started, no one was talking about DeSci. I think that or anything D. Right? It was more like you crack on with things. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think in 2017 particularly, there was kind of an underlying assumption that you could understand and track the entire space, the entire blockchain space, right? Because there was a much smaller community overall. The other kind of very, very qualitative metric I often use in my mind is the number of times I had to explain to people what crypto was or what blockchain was exponential at that time. So I started working at ConsenSys. No one knew what I even did or kind of like what the job description was. Whereas fast forwarded to 2025, now I can use basically one word to say what I work in, and I can say that I work in crypto, and people nod and understand, even if it's my mom's friend who is not in the world of tech.
Yeah.
So that's a very kind of like soft metric, but certainly shows the change in terms of kind of like broad education across the world that's happened in regards to blockchain tech.
Yeah, I have the same experience. People are a little bit more familiar with it, uh, very often for the better, but also sometimes you get a bit of a frown, specifically when it's crypto, and then kind of people thinking you're trying to scam them and kind of all those things. So for some, still a bit scary. For you as well, do you have the same experience?
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, I try not to dismiss or reduce that impression they have, because there are, of course, some crypto scams out there, etc. And instead, I often explain that what we focus on is the underlying technology, not necessarily just creating coins, and creating these like pump and dump schemes, etc. But
Yeah.
really build, it's just like normal startups, right? And the technology happens to be blockchain based rather than centralized servers or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Great. So in 2017, you weren't involved yet with the with Tachyon, now ConsenSys Mesh. So not yet on the accelerator end. What were you focused on? Are you more an investment guy, or were you more kind of a software engineer? What's your area of expertise?
Yeah, so primarily investment, but it was actually kind of internal investment is what we were doing at the time. So ConsenSys, just to draw the timeline a little more clearly, 2017 we were pretty small, 100, 200 employees. 2018, 19 we grew incredibly quickly. At some point, I think reaching over 1,000 employees, and then have kind of shrank back since then to a manageable level. There was also a corporate event in 2020 where the company split into two, so the software products spun out into a different entity, and then all the investments remained in ConsenSys AG, which is the group where I work. And but the reason I share the kind of growth in employees is we were building a ton of products internally. So we had several hundred projects, products, different things were being incubated, as you mentioned earlier. And so that was, broadly speaking, the ConsenSys Venture Studio effort. In 2017, because we were and beyond 2018, 2019, because we were growing very largely and there were so many things happening. There were several different teams working on different elements of these products. So there was a Tachyon team, obviously, that you interfaced with. There was specifically a venture fund team that was focused on external investments, and then I was more focused on kind of the internal resource allocation among a huge number of teams that were building various products, including MetaMask, including a number of others that have spun out. Gnosis started at ConsenSys, Gitcoin, you name it. There was a huge number of projects that kind of had their start at ConsenSys and then eventually, became independent companies, raised external capital, etc. So to answer your question, I was focused on that internal resource allocation, but then eventually over time, I've been there now 8 years. We did condense or consolidate all of the various startup and investment activities under one roof, which is kind of how we're operating today. So, over time, Tachyon, the external investments, the internal incubation, everything kind of related to startups was consolidated, and that's how we operate today.
Okay, so is there still because we had an amazing journey with you guys, because we were accepted into the accelerator like a cohort, very Y Combinator approach. We kicked off in Berlin. We were there together for a week, and then we went to San Francisco. Now, in that year, 2019, my daughter was also born, so I didn't participate in the San Francisco part, but my co-founder did. The startups were really kind of taken on this journey, introduced to as many people of the team, and there was all these intros. Is that still intact, or you guys have, as you say, consolidated everything and it's more like a more straightforward investment?
So we're doing primarily just external investment. Tachyon, we did run several more cohorts after 2019, but as of recently, just took a strategic pause on it. There, when Tachyon was started, it was I believe the first really Web3 focused accelerator. Perhaps Outlier Ventures was running one as well, but very, very few of them existed. And then, of course, over time, a huge number of them proliferated, and they're both, they're not cheap to run, and our portfolio has grown over time too. So right now we have about 150 portfolio companies, and that's just the companies that are still, live. We've had 400 to 500 over the course of those years, and so today we really focus on managing our existing portfolio, supporting those companies as best we can. Myself and the other partners spend the vast majority of our time just working directly on a day-to-day basis with those founders. And then we also continue to make external investments, however, not running Tachyon as a cohort-based accelerator program, primarily kind of traditional VC investment, which is external investment in various safe or priced rounds.
Yeah. Nice. I'm going to go back to 2017 and then, fast forward to now. But if you look back at kind of the development of the market, when you say we were, one of the first Web3 incubators out there, what can you tell me about how the market has evolved? And, before we hit the record button, I kind of said, I'd be curious to know, maybe in 2017, you said, this is going to be it. Here's, let's put all our money here, all our eggs in one basket. And I don't know if we can get it that juicy, but maybe there's something that you say, this didn't go at all the way we expected. Where is this? Well, I had no idea, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, especially in the direction of what didn't go as expected. And I think, the entire value proposition of blockchains, for the most part, at least as I framed them in my own mind then, was that they disintermediate, large centralized corporations, companies, governments, etc. And that disintermediation, I think, hasn't quite happened to the degree we thought. And what I mean by that is, or that I thought I should say, what I mean by that is, if you look at one of the most broadly accepted or broadly used use cases today, it's stablecoins. And those stablecoins are being implemented very much so by banks, Stripe, large companies are using them. There's, of course, USDC run by Circle is now a public company listed in the US as a public company. So I wouldn't quite consider that a full disintermediation peer-to-peer payment system. Of course, it does run on that decentralized tech, but there are those large centralized players still very much involved. And I think that was one of the things that, there was, for example, one of the reasons I got into crypto overall was, I think it was 2016, the World Food Program ran a really interesting experiment. There was Jordanian refugees that needed, particular aid, right, from the World Food Program and other organizations. The problem with delivering aid is often much of that aid gets kind of siphoned off due to corruption and due to everyone taking a chunk out of it as it goes through the chain of administrators of the aid. And so they ran an experiment where they just used blockchain tech to deliver the aid directly to refugees, and refugees could claim their aid using biometric data. I believe it was retina scans at the time. And the metric that they touted was that 99% of the aid then went directly to the refugees. Phenomenal outcome. I think it was overall a successful pilot project, but you didn't see that translate into, global scale disintermediation, or the distribution of aid globally is not now done that way yet. Yeah. 9 years has passed. So I think that was kind of my hope, or the aspiration for the tech overall, was that type of disruption. And not surprisingly, the old guard has held on, and there's a fair amount of the existing fiat payment rails and just existing infrastructure that's certainly still in place, because you can't spend 100 years building an existing financial infrastructure and then expect to replace it in 5. Yeah. At least I don't believe so. Yeah.
No. Yeah, it sounds also a little bit like in our heads, technology goes faster than it's really adopted in the real world. And I think that's also something that I hear often when I speak to Web3 founders. They've got this entire utility, these scenarios for here's what it can do and here's what it will help and kind of those things. But the use case for it isn't really there yet in the real world, so to say. So, kind of like if and when people are ready to think that way and go ahead and, do all of this, then yes, I hear you. That's how it could work. But it's gonna take a lot before people actually start working with it. So that's very often, especially in our kind of narrative, DeSci, when we talk about disrupting science, you need the adoption of kind of the powers that be, right? The institutions that are doing the actual science to kind of start working with it. And we can develop all technology we like on our little islands, but people need to start working with it eventually to measure whether this is going to be successful, yes or no.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I also think very related to your point about what's changed and expectations then versus expectations now. A lot of projects were too early in 2017, 18, 19, simply because the infrastructure wasn't there, or the certain like UX elements weren't there to allow, to your point, people within an industry to actually use the technology easily. So, simple example, we had a startup that pursued supply chain technology, right, to track and trace. Their pilot project was around tuna. So having a fisherman basically tag the fish and then being able to trace that tuna all the way through to the end retail customer to show that it was sustainably fished and that it came from where they were claiming, it wasn't farmed, etc. But then you need the dock worker in Indonesia or wherever the fish is caught to have an app or to use some sort of system that is user friendly enough that actually places some sort of tag on it that becomes on chain. None of that existed, right? They were still using PDF or just printed out pieces of paper. So to jump from that to very complicated crypto wallets wasn't the case. And I'm sure it's something similar in science, where you have a lot of people using technology they've been using for 25 years. So getting them to change behaviors is very difficult.
100%. And we encounter it often. I think what has changed is that people do see the benefit of it. So people do understand better why it is important, for instance, to keep your health data safe. And I think that's because unfortunately, the statistics on cyber hacking, for instance, in healthcare have been dramatic, right? 133 million people were victimized in 2023. That number went up with 55 million. So 188 million people were victimized in 2024. So these are just globally. So these are staggering numbers, and 2025, it doesn't appear to go down at all, right? I think as we use technology more frequent, we are also more acceptant of the fact that we are the product, so that our data is used and commoditized in a way, and we therefore understand the fact that we need to keep it safe because we understand its monetary value. I do think that has changed, but I completely agree with you that the adoption of it all is still it's still starting. People are still finding workarounds to make their life easier, and as you say, an advanced crypto wallet or our vaults, for instance. Sometimes people don't get it or don't want to put the effort in. So yeah, that's unfortunate. But hey, I think we're winning. We're making strides. So we're winning terrain, most definitely. At least I'm the ever optimist. but yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, it's a small thing, but it is a big limiting factor, I think, to some of that adoption. So MetaMask now has the ability to just pay for transactions in any token, right? But it seems easy to just easier said than done in order to implement that, because what you need is cheap transaction fees. You need routing across chains. You need a lot of underlying infrastructure for that to work very effectively. But they've now released it, so you no longer need to, go have a friend send you ETH in order to just execute your first transaction on chain. You can, there's many easier ways to both on ramp, off ramp, pay for transactions, etc. Account abstraction. I mean, I could go on. So a lot of that UX friction is being removed kind of week by week, and I think it's accelerating as well now that there's so much infrastructure. The number of users is higher. The kind of return on investment to build out those features or build out that infrastructure is better because there are more users and there is more transaction volume, etc. Yeah. So it's I think that the scales have the scales have shifted in our favor to some degree.
Yeah, that's us as the ever optimist. What
exactly?
What do you think can so taking this back to the glass is half empty, not half full. What would you say is what would you say is kind of a risk for blockchain technology? So, for an example, like taking now AI, right? I think AI is just the massive explosion of AI since tools like ChatGPT, Claude, kind of all those things. For better for worse, everything is on AI. Do you feel that has affected kind of how people think about blockchain-enabled technology?
Yeah, certainly. There's some realities, which is there's a finite amount of capital, energy, time, resources, attention that gets paid to call it innovation, broadly speaking. And so AI has obviously sucked a lot of that air out of the room. And I can continue to be a pessimist, right? I think the other half of it is that there's a lot of use cases where blockchain tech is effectively the back end. And I think the crypto optimist's hope was always that crypto would have a front end and would be user facing, and people would see that they, the values that they have in terms of privacy and ownership and autonomy and agency, etc., get translated into how they actually interact with, various technologies, assets, etc. And there's one thing AI has done is, it's a much, frankly, better interface. Chat versus, cryptographic hashes. It's a clear winner when you can just use a chat interface. And so, blockchain has kind of, rightfully so in some scenarios, been pushed to be the back end of things, whether that's to be a decentralized ledger or decentralized database of some sort, or the payment rails, etc. Most users don't care about the payment rails. They don't go don't go check their Visa transaction and make sure that it's actually executed on the back end after they buy something at the store. They have the item that they bought, and that's all that matters. And I think certain scenarios are going to be true for crypto as well. But I also think there's there's another case to be made in terms of the crypto and AI intersection that I'm happy to dive into. But that's, I think, the pessimistic case is, the amount of resources being driven towards AI, and then also kind of like how user facing is it, and does that matter? Does it become more infrastructure?
Yeah, I think blockchain is the non-sexy part of it all, whereas AI is kind of, oh wow, look at this.
Exactly.
I was just saying also in an interview yesterday that people are actually now proud of the fact that they have manipulated imagery. So there was someone on LinkedIn that said, oh, look at me with this movie star. And then, haha, got you. It wasn't actually me with the movie star. But can you believe how real this is? And I'm like, why is this something that we then applaud? It's like, oh, it's so real. Oh my goodness. And I'm like, I don't get the thinking that we should be happy with this. I think we should kind of, earmark this as like, this is not real, obviously. But in our thinking, we're still in the discovery phase or honeymoon phases with AI that we think that's fun, and so it's kind of like we applaud where before we said this is fake news or these are manipulated facts or whatever you call it, alternative facts or whatever you want to call it. We're now so happy that it is. AI is all of a sudden made us proud of that. Whereas I'm like, no, don't be proud of that. This is like, let's go the other way. So it's kind of, it feels like where's the, I'm trying to find kind of solid ground again to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. But AI has shaken things up a little. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah. Agreed. I mean, there's an old internet saying where on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And now it's kind of the inverse of that, which is no one knows if you're human. And so I think it speaks to your point about, that photo from a friend or contact on LinkedIn. I do think like Sam Altman made an interesting point, which was he was saying when you take a photo today or even 3 years ago pre ChatGPT, most people taking it on their phones. Phones are kind of embedding certain elements of the digital tech, AI, imagery kind of software gets embedded into the photo, right? It's not actually a perfect representation of the light photons hitting film, which is what photography has traditionally been. Instead, there's this compute layer that's translating it into a photo. And so even those photos that we take as being perfectly real, right? They're not actually perfectly real the same way that film was. So there was an incremental shift from quote unquote real to this compute translation. And then I think obviously AI and there's a big leap now to a further kind of quote unquote translation, right? You can just prompt it and say, hey, I was actually with Barack Obama last night. And then here's the photo. And obviously that's very not real, but to the audience, it's tough to tell which is which. And so that line is going to get more and more blurred, which I think does go to the counterweight of AI being crypto, in that, AI generates an abundance of data, primarily media, content, text, etc. Crypto does a very good job of verifying data. So ownership, the origin, how it's traveled, what rights are associated with it, etc. And as of today, that verification is unbreakable. So I think those are good kind of, there are two technologies that counterbalance each other in that sense.
Yeah, I think I like to think so. We're now stepping into with genomes.io using decentralized artificial intelligence with synthetic genomic simulators. So what we wanted to do is we want to address the needs of our clients when it comes to genomic data analysis, but for them to be able to do it at scale, safely source data, and last but not least, also very precise. So speaking to diseases, rare diseases, or conditions that they're looking for. And for that, we're starting to embrace. So we're now developing our own subnet on BitTensor, to running or offering the disambiguation of synthetic genetic simulators, so working with synthetic genetic data, not real life genetic data, but still having the ability to do robust analysis at scale for our clients. And I would say what we do is we offer on one side the beauty of AI, which is in these simulators and in our subnet, that you can take on loads of information. So not anymore tens of thousands of data sets, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data sets. So what you get out of it is going to be a lot more robust and based on research, granular research at scale, right? And at the same time, and I think this is where our encryption and blockchain comes in, we ensure that it's all done safely, right? A lot safer than it's currently being done. So I'd like to think that that's where the best of both worlds meet. And this is just my little island, but I'm sure there are loads of other examples out there that can do the same. You just said I can give examples of crypto and AI, maybe also in a good sense of the word. So please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think just to touch on what you said, the work you're doing around, broadly speaking, healthcare data and specifically genetic data has come up in conversations in our investment committee very recently, as we've looked at startups kind of in that space, right? Collecting obviously healthcare data, making that easier, using AI for various use cases. And the concern when they are centralized technologies is always that is a prime honeypot, not just for monetary reasons, but if a state actor wanted to deploy some sort of chemical warfare, almost genetic warfare, which no one's ever seen, then you need that data to be highly secure, not only for that kind of extreme example, but then coming down the spectrum to something more, almost more likely, right? It's just your healthcare data is highly personal. If someone wanted to manipulate you into buying something, that's that can be done much more easily. I mean, that's effectively what food scientists are doing when they're designing Doritos, for example. And so protecting that data just couldn't underscore the importance more, I don't think. Yeah, and then to answer your question a little more directly, I mean, I think there's a number of things. The biggest one that's on our minds is effectively proof of humanity. So I guess going back to the phrase, right? If no one knows you're a dog on the internet, being able to prove you're human, and that's going to be more and more difficult. You want to be able to have some sort of reputation to navigate the internet, where more and more kind of activity is happening, primarily economic activity, but also social reputation activity. So to be able to, for example, I'm sure you've run into it in the crypto scene. It's very common to run into people pretending to be somebody else in order to scam you. So that proof of humanity is massive, because I want to both protect my own reputation and then also not get succumbed to attack. So proof of humanity is a big one. I think the other things that kind of extend beyond that is, having distributed compute, distributed model training, verifiable models. You can imagine a world where the number and importance of the decisions you're making based on the output of AI models is going to continue to grow. So right now it might be, summarize these 6 web pages or make a recommendation for which pocket knife I should buy. But then when it comes to I need to hire an attorney for the medical lawsuit I'm going to be a part of because this doctor was mistreating my mother, suddenly that decision has a huge impact on the outcome of your life, on the just on a huge number of factors. And so getting to the point where it's not a black box of a recommendation coming from OpenAI, but you can verify kind of what were the inputs to this model, what are the data sources that were used to generate an answer, and then being able to trace that, because it is such an important decision, and to be able to verify it over time. Especially when you've got 100,000 people, maybe it's not even just the attorney. Now they're choosing their doctors, and it's literal life and death outcomes. It's literal kind of quality of life outcomes. There's just a huge amount of, I think, weight that's going to be placed on those things. And again, this is a bit of a optimist long-term view. It's not happening in the next 2 months, but I do think that verifiability and ability to kind of see into the black box is going to become increasingly important over time.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100% because it's going to be a challenge, right? So many things you're already questioning whether you are being spoken to by an AI bot or a real life human being, and I can't tell the difference anymore at some moments, right? Specifically if it's in writing. So you want to know if I'm dealing with a human being, and I think this is also what makes us human beings. So I spoke to as I said before, the executive director of Stanford Accelerator for Learning yesterday, and she said our future or the future of our children is all going to be about their capacity to build relationships, because out of these relationships come new things that they can learn and that they can understand. But it's building relationships with human beings, right? It's not building a relationship with technology. Even though she didn't dismiss that, she says, what I mean is relationship with human beings. So verifying, and as many of our relationships are already induced or created by the use of technology, taking dating apps as an example, for instance, you're meeting someone else through an app, which is, very normal for people to meet each other these days. What makes you sure that it's a human being? Like if you can be tricked into it not being a human being. And yeah, I think that's very fascinating. Already, I think there was I listened to the All In podcast where they spoke about an AI psychosis. So already people using ChatGPT for psychological advice, like as a therapist. And even Sam Altman saying that's not a good idea. Don't do that, because first of all, you don't know what you put your information into. There are no privacy clauses, or they don't have to keep it safe. But just the fact that people use it is also kind of a sign of there's a need for it, right? Why would people do it in the first place? That's what we need to wonder. What made you think this was a good idea in the first place? And the fact that so many people do is obvious that they're using it for that purpose. So yeah, big questions.
That's a huge one. My wife is a therapist, and she is very much a proponent of kind of the type of thinking you're referring to in terms of people to people relationships mattering an increasing amount. And I like going back to my kind of ultimate optimism, which I can't seem to rid myself of. My hope is that a lot of the kind of negative elements of technology, particularly over the last 10 years, maybe even 20, but mostly the last 10, right? There's an addictive nature. It's consumed a lot of our time and attention, etc. Is that some of the AI interfaces, I imagine, will help it kind of blend into the background a little bit more. So if you're able to do things that are more voice enabled, if we're able to do things that don't require a laptop and a computer, there's all sorts of concerns around privacy and audio recording, etc. But if you are able to address those and then remove the number of screens from our life, remove the amount of like time and energy required to do things with technology because it is more efficient, that ideally we kind of get over that hump as a society and get back to a kind of a more human style of living, really, versus an email style of living.
Yeah. I want to get back to investment, because
Sure.
you're expanding your horizons as an investor. Yeah, you're a partner with ConsenSys Mesh, but I believe you're also doing some other exciting bits and pieces with another fund. What the things we just said? What does that look like from an investment perspective? And often, I think the investment trajectory is slightly more short term than maybe the long term problems we just discussed. But where do you see these two rhyming, or not at all?
Yeah, certainly rhyming. So, yes, exactly what you said. I'm an investor at ConsenSys Mesh. And then in April, co founded a new venture firm called Systemic Ventures. And the primary reason behind that was really to do exactly what you said, which is expand beyond solely crypto focused investments, which is obviously where ConsenSys has excelled. And so at Systemic, we focus broadly on frontier tech and primarily the intersection of frontier technologies. So a big one for us is crypto and AI, both because of the explosion of AI, but also our background and deep interest in crypto technologies. But you also have other intersections, right? It could be centralized AI and spatial media, could be any number of other things. And so they, at least in our view, they certainly rhyme. We've made investments through that new firm in distributed learning through Pluralis Research, agent coordination frameworks like QuestFlow, new forms of or new kind of methodologies around capital formation, which crypto's been very good at, right? ICOs in 2017 exploded. There just wasn't a lot of clarity around how they should be done. There was no reputation, no just a whole lot of guardrails that weren't in place that now with more regulatory clarity and more kind of back to our earlier conversation around infrastructure, identity, reputation being built. So we've made a few investments in that space. Allegiant is one where they use a long-term view of a person's reputation in terms of, you invest in a token, how long did you hold it, have you contributed to the code base, were you active on their community, like all sorts of analytics get rolled up into the type of investor you are, just as a retail investor, not VC. So then when the next token sale happens on their platform, the team can see, great, this is the highest quality group of people that has actually contributed to a community before. Those are the types of people we want. And then, as a result, you really have people. I think it's one version of the optimistic outcomes we're all looking for, right? Where what high quality people contribute to a network or contribute to a product or contribute to a community, they actually get rewarded for it as a result. It's not just the old guard that's well capitalized that gets to continue to take advantage of the public, broadly speaking. So yeah, so very much I think they rhyme, and I think that's those are a few examples of those intersections that we were referencing before.
Nice, nice. I get very excited when I hear these things because there's so much in the future, right? Almost too much to comprehend, to kind of work on. And as you say, like I'm 100% sure that 99.9% of all of us is doing this because it is growth for the better, right? It helps us human beings, and but sometimes you also need to be worried, or at least not be as naive to think that it cannot be used in a malicious way, right? And I think this is also where I think, going back full circle, where a tool like blockchain could help, right? To kind of double down on security and safety, verification of whether you're a real human being, or kind of all those things, so that it could really help us for the better, and put these systems in place that are so that they could really do what they're intended for, if that makes sense, rather than being abused for something that they shouldn't be. Yeah. So yeah, lots of work to be done, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you're nailing on. There's this interesting friction, I think, often in this space, and maybe in a lot of technical spaces, but particularly with crypto, where there's both very, it's very technical, very concrete in terms of what can be done, what can't be done. It's a deterministic technology, etc. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there's this huge array of philosophical differences, and it gets very squishy out there. But you have to interact with both and kind of wrestle with both. And for me, it's taken me a while to kind of boil down what's important on the philosophical end. But I think it's basically what you mentioned, which is privacy, ownership, and autonomy, and being able to have those for people. I think I can't speak for everyone, but I think most individuals feel that those things are important. Being able to act on your own, being able to have certain private conversations, transactions, etc., as you see fit, and then having ownership over over the things in your life and being able to see the benefits from that ownership. And I think, thankfully, crypto does a lot of those things in various use cases.
Yeah, definitely. Thomas, it's been a great conversation. Before I get to my very last question, in your journey with ConsenSys Mesh, and now also the Systemic Fund, what are you most proud of?
That's a great question. I think, honestly, most proud of, not, at least personally speaking, not chasing the, just chasing dollar signs and chasing the next hot narrative. Myself, the team I work with, and particularly Joe Lubin, the founder of ConsenSys, are all very much aligned, I think, on that set of values, which is, we invest with a patient capital mindset, and then also, there's been many opportunities over the course of 8 years, not surprisingly, to make a quick buck that we have not pursued because, frankly, of integrity and wanting to make sure we're acting both with a long-term point of view, but also just in ways that align with our values, to put it in the most kind of cliche way. And there's been a lot of temptation to go, launch the next ICO that just pulls money in and doesn't actually deliver on any product. There's always teams you can advise where you get a slice of a token and you try to pump their price and dump on retail, etc. There's a lot of firms that do those sorts of things, and frankly, we've never been one. We've probably could have made more money doing so, but it's felt great to be a decade later and know that we've kind of chosen that higher path. I think, not to be too self-aggrandizing, but it's certainly something I'm proud of that I don't speak to often, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my philosophy is your work is so much needed, because if the work focusing on utility and making sure that decentralized tech has a purpose wouldn't be there, then the entire market wouldn't be there, right? If we're all going for the short-term pump and dump, as I'd like to call it, then how long is this going to last? Not long, because it's going to fall apart, scandal after scandal, or we're just chasing the next quick buck after the other. That doesn't solve anything for anyone, and so I do think that the longevity of the market is in making sure that there's a use case for everyone, right? Not only for crypto aficionados, but for everyone in the real world as well, whether this is in science or finance or whichever sector you're in. I do think it's important. So yeah, I
Absolutely
agree. And kudos to you for being focused on that. My very last question, Thomas, is a little bit about reading. I'm always fascinated to know, like, you as someone who's so familiar with investing and technology and looking into that. In your path, has there been one kind of book or platform or magazine or whatever it is that has inspired you, that you said, hey, this is something that I need to make sure others know about because this has inspired me in my journey?
I would say, I'm very much try to consume very selected but a wide variety of content and information. And I think, the thing that's top of mind recently actually goes back to what you said before about relationships. And I read a really great article. I could share the link, but it was all about finding different modalities of hanging out, and mostly about going back to relationships that are a little more porous. We're very structured in our lives today, where you schedule something on your calendar just to hang out with your friends, and going back to this more kind of fluid human interaction, which I thought was really, frankly, powerful, because I think it's kind of rooted in how we want to behave, right? You want to just stop by your neighbor's house. You want to have someone pop over for a casual drink and not have it be a dinner party or have it be something super formal. And so, that article actually made a kind of an impact on myself and our group of friends, and we're trying to aspire to that lifestyle more. So that's been top of mind recently, actually. Outside, I know it's very much not investing, but it relates to it because I invest money in the world I want to create, and that's part of it.
The reading recommendation I got yesterday was the Book of Joy, right, whereby Desmond Tutu speaks to the Dalai Lama. Was also completely had nothing to do with the topic we were talking about, but it inspired the person, right? So we're all people, so we kind of need to get our inspiration from different places. So, and I love what you're saying about spontaneity, right? Just be a person and, be spontaneous, be authentic in the social connections and the relations that you build, rather than making it a calendar item that when you're going to meet and sit down for half an hour. And, that's been that. Definitely more of that. Thomas, I have the feeling we can talk for hours and hours, but we're at the end of this great episode. If people want to find out more about ConsenSys, where should they go?
Mesh.xyz is where I work. That's the investment firm, and then ConsenSys.io is the software arm. So those are the two main URLs, of course. And then Systemic.vc is our new firm as well.
Nice. We'll make sure to include them in the show notes. Thomas, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much, and good luck on all your doings moving forward. Thomas Rush.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You've listened to Pulse by AlphaWire, produced by Natalie Piles and Amela Faisal, with great music, The Optimist, written by Holly Hamill, performed and produced by Alo. Episodes hosted weekly by me, Aldo de Pauw.